Hey everyone, it's me. It's the Act 5 of The Tempest, and so I thought I would just do one last video for the play and put that up. And like I said, I've really enjoyed your posts on it, and so let's wrap it up. And hopefully, some of the themes that we've been talking about come together with bit of an intensification on the question of forgiveness, right? Because what we've seen up until now in the plays various types of revenge, right? Prospero's like, I got a plan. I've enlisted all of these spirits to help me set it up, and those guys are really going to pay for what they did to me, and I'm going to restore order to what rightly should have been mine, and I'm going to set my daughter up to be restored to her lineage and all of that. And we see a little shift here, possibly connected to the change in him that I talked about in Act 4. I wish it was we. This is terrible. Where he has the moment where he realizes that his power is fleeting, that life is fleeting, and attempts at control are not ever going to finish the job, right? Because he gave up too much control when he turned his kingdom over to his brother. He perhaps tried to exert too much control when he was on his island. And I wonder if the play is trying to get us somewhere more balanced, because he returns to Milan, he returns to his position, but then it's a little melancholy, right? At the one of his last things he says, like, I return to Milan and every third thought will be of the grave. Not every thought and not no thoughts, right? He is going home, he's going back to his responsibilities, but he is not a sorcerer anymore, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So what I want to do is talk first a little bit about how this question of mercy and forgiveness play out in Act 5. I want to talk a little bit about him giving up his magic, and then a little bit about Caliban. So let's get to it. Okay, let me drop my face down a little bit. Okay, so right here is early on, one of the discussion questions is about this. And Ariel has said to him, like, hey, like, they're all under your spell and they're miserable. Like, there's a lot of crying, there's a lot of torture, and it's a theme. Gonzalo is very worried about them, and because Gonzalo's not being tortured, he was only ever kind and loyal, even though he's a bit of a bore. And Ariel says, you know, your charm. Yeah, that's right. Your charm. Oh, all I have to do is that. Your charm so strongly works them that if you now beheld them, your affections would become tender. Do you think so? And Ariel says, mine would, sir, were I human. And so Prospero has this moment that even the spirit, which art but air, shall I not also, right? Like, if this spirit, who's not even a person, can see their affliction and be moved to kindness, I can too. And he says, in thinking about this, he says, you know, through their high wrongs I am struck to the quick. Like, they hurt me, and it has ruined my life, yet with my noble a reason against my fury do I take part. The rarer action is in virtue, that is in virtue than in vengeance. So he sees that they're penchant, which means that they're ashamed or that they're sorry, and he kind of has this shift where he's more focused on reason and less on vengeance. Or this was his plan all along. I don't know. I feel like there's some change in him here, but it's a question. Perhaps this was his design from the beginning. So he introduces the question of remorse here and forgiveness. The next bit is where he gives up his magic, but I want to come back to that. So the next part, and this is all Act 5, I want to look at is here. It's a little bit later. You can see it really clearly in the film where they're all sort of frozen in the circle that he's put them in. And he goes around and talks to all of them. He thanks Gonzalo, honorable man, and thanks him for taking care of him. And then he gets to Alonso. And remember, Alonso is the king of Naples, who sort of was in league with Prospero's brother. And he says, didst thou, Alonso, use me in my daughter, most cruelly did thou use me and my daughter. Thy brother was a furtherer in the act. So you two betrayed me. Thou art pinched for it now, Sebastian. Flesh and blood, you, brother mine, that entertained ambition, expelled remorse and nature. He's talking to Antonio here, whom with Sebastian, whose inward pinches therefore are most strong, would have killed your king. I do forgive thee, unnatural though thou art. So I'm right here. I didn't do a great job of reading it, but this is so interesting to me because they can't talk back to him at this point. And in fact, they might not even be able to hear him. And he's listing their crimes and he says, I forgive you. And it's interesting to me that they didn't ask for forgiveness, nor can they even hear him give it, which raises to me the question, who is forgiveness for, right? And he doesn't pretend that everything's okay, right? I do forgive thee, unnatural though thou art. Like, I know that you suck a little bit, right? But he offers his forgiveness anyway. But Alonso, I know I'm going kind of fast, but Alonso later is the only one who demonstrates true remorse. They all come out of their spell, and Prospero's like, it's me. Like, guess what? I'm the person you betrayed the worst, and so I'm here. And Alonso doesn't believe it at first, right? He's like, are you an enchantment? And he touches him, right? Thy pulse beats as of flesh and blood since I saw thee. And so he offers his apology. Thy dukedom I resign, and do entreat thou pardon me my wrongs. But what's interesting to me about this is he's already been forgiven. And there's all kinds of ways to think about the way that forgiveness functions differently and apology functions differently on both sides. Like, just because somebody apologizes doesn't mean that they will be forgiven. And just because somebody offers forgiveness doesn't mean the other person is sorry, which again is like, what is forgiveness for and who is it really for? There's also an interesting potential way to think of the sort of Christian undertones of this, right? That it matters. Alonso has to say he's sorry, but there's a way in which forgiveness was already available to him. You know, symbolism. Okay. So these two are genuinely both forgiving and remorseful. In many ways, Alonso is restored. His son is not dead. His apology seems to go the best. But then, I know, I'm just racing through it. But then, Prospero later to Sebastian is like, for you, most wicked sir, whom to call brother would even infect my mouth, I do forgive thy rankest fault, all of them, and require my dukedom of me. So he needs the thing back, like, you have to give me back my kingdom. But there's just something so amazing about this. He's just like, you remain. Oh, wait a minute. It's Antonius's brother. I goofed that up. He can't even say his name. Forgiveness here doesn't mean that you then have to be like buddies with the person that you have forgiven, right? Like, there is a kind of clear-eyed view of who these men are and what they're like. And forgiveness is offered anyway. And again, this raises the question of who is forgiveness for, and what does it mean, right? It doesn't mean that all is forgotten. It doesn't mean that he suddenly was really into hanging out with these guys. And he doesn't turn them in, right? So there's something about mercy there and as well. But Prospero's first movement up through sort of the middle of Act 4 has been revenge and plotting. Something shifts, I think, a little bit when he's like, oh, I'm probably like an old man who might die one day. Mortality. And then the track continues perhaps to this moment. And I just think it's an interesting question raised by the play. Okay. Perhaps in the same vein, two more interesting things happen at the end. There's also a really great, I didn't select it, but this is just famous, so I have to point it out. Miranda says when she walks out of her room, there it is. remember, she's only ever known her dad in Caliban. Then she sees Ferdinand, who she marries right away. She walks out and suddenly there's like all these other dudes. And so she says, "Oh, wonder how many goodly creatures are there here. How beauteous mankind is. Oh, brave new world that has such people in it." And Prospero's like, "Yeah, these are the only dudes you've seen." But it's a famous line, and I just wanted to point it out. And Brave New World is an upsetting book by Aldous Huxley. Okay. There are two other things that I want to talk about that are potentially related and perhaps continue to be connected to this question of remorse and forgiveness. Earlier in the act, I just wanted to clump them together. Prospero does this amazing thing where he describes his power, which is kind of greater than we've even known, and then he gives it up. So I'm going to go to that now. Remember, this is at the beginning of the act. He has told Ariel right above there, "Let him go. Like, I'm done punishing them. They're sorry. My charms all break, their senses all restore, and they shall be themselves. So, like, let's let them go." And then he's by himself and he traces this magic circle and he describes all of his power. It's kind of amazing, right? It's, he's talking to spirits here. He says, "I have bedimmed the noontide sun so I can make it dark in the middle of the day. I've called forth mutinous winds and twixt the green sea and the azured vault set roaring war." Like, I can cause storms. I've gotten thunder to happen. Like, I'm a tough dude. This is my favorite one. "Graves at my command have waked their sleepers, opened and let them forth by my so potent art." I can raise the dead. We haven't seen this yet. I feel like that's like a sequel. We're not going to see it, but like, he's so powerful that he can like raise the dead, right? But then he says also a famous thing, "But this rough magic I here abjure, and when I have required some help," right, "I'm going to give it up. As soon as I get back, I'm finished with this, I'll break my staff," right? "But this rough magic I here abjure," which again, people connect to Shakespeare's being at the end of his career, and we can think of plays as rough magic that raise people from the dead and all of that. But also, if we just think of Prospero and control over nature, "I'll break my staff, bury it certain fathoms in the earth, and deeper than did ever plummet sound, I'll drown my book." Okay, so fun to just watch a page. This is kind of extraordinary, right? And it's beautiful and strange, and also raises a question, like, why doesn't he, that's on the other side, cameras are weird. Why doesn't he keep his magic and take it back to Milan with him? Like, he could, right? If his task is to be a good leader and he has these tools at his command, why does he leave it on the island? Perhaps the island represents something he needs to leave behind. Raising the dead is unnatural, and this is a comedy, and comedies are about restoring order. So perhaps everything has to be restored into a natural order of things, right? Where, and especially in this time period, God's at the top, kings and noble folk are at the, well, God is at the top. Kings and such are right under that. Probably priests are above them, next to them. It gets a little confusing. But there's a hierarchy that holds everybody in place that's divinely ordered in this period. And so Prospero's unnatural power also has to be given up. But I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts about why he has to give it up. Okay. The final thing that I want to talk about is his last exchange with Caliban, which in many ways is in line with everything else. He's like, Caliban comes and he's like, "I was so stupid to think these guys were better than you. I want to serve you now. Please give me a job." And he does. He's like, "Go tidy up my room. We're going to have a party before we leave to go back to Milan," right? So Caliban's like, "Oh, I'll be pinched for sure. Like, you're really going to torture me." And he goes to do it. So in some ways, that's a restoration to order. But there's this interesting, also somewhat famous line for people interested in Caliban and Prospero's relationship to Caliban, and especially the kind of colonial overtones, right, of theft and torture and violence and things like that. I'm going to do that. This is toward the end. So Prospero says, mark but the badges of these men, my lord, then say if they be true. He's saying, like, are these your idiot butlers who wanted to kill me and take over the island? That's Trinculo and Stefano. This misshapen knave, his mother was a witch, one so strong that could control the moon, make flows and ebbs, and deal in her command without her power. But he also has this kind of power, right? He takes it from the witch. These three have robbed me, and this demi-devil, for he's a bastard one, had plotted with them. He's talking about Caliban there. Had plotted with them to take my life. Two of these fellows you must know and own. This thing of darkness I acknowledge mine. And then he just moves on. I shall be pinched to death. Caliban doesn't see it as any kind of acknowledgement of Prospero's role in his unhappiness. But this thing of darkness I acknowledge mine is something he hasn't done from the beginning. He's just always been, you're my servant. If you don't do what I want, I'll torture you. You were born this bad. You're crazy. And he's never been able to even, for a moment, suggest that he bears any responsibility for or to Caliban. And maybe he does it here. And maybe that's part of his transformation, if he has transformed at the end. A lot is left unresolved. He's still furious at Sebastian and Antonio. We don't know what's going to happen to the drunken butlers, but this brief resolution with Caliban happens after he has forgiven everybody else and given up his magic and been willing to, or not willing, he wants to go home. He wants to give up the unnatural power of the island and take his daughter home and be Duke of Milan again. Okay. I'll wrap this up for everyone. And I don't know what I'm scrolling for. This epilogue is often a convention of Victorian Elizabethan theater where somebody from the play comes out and basically like trolls for applause. I really like it. It's cut out of the movie, but I'll let you take a look at that. Okay, so that's my quick review of Act 5. I ended up really enjoying the play, and I think perhaps because, I mean, I already knew that I would like it. I wouldn't have picked it otherwise, but I think I saw it in a slightly different way reading it this time, in part because the world is so crazy, and I got really kind of taken with the through line of, I think I'm in control, I'm not in control, and we try to orchestrate the people around us, and there is a moment of recognition that the world will surprise us again, which is either very distressing or very comforting, or perhaps both. So I'm going to push pause. You guys are all great, and I'm genuinely upset that one of my plans, which was to talk to you about this play in person, was thwarted by the unexpected. I hope everybody's doing okay, and that's Act 5. Okay, bye.